Blessed be the Lord my rock, who trains my hands for war and my fingers for battle. Psalm 144. So, today, we're going to be talking about the creme de la creme. Perhaps the best full-size fighting handgun when operating CONUS. That's a bold statement. Let's see if I can back that up. Hello, gunfighters, and welcome to Gunfighter Life, the podcast where we talk about gunfighting and gun-related stuff the right way with God at the center. So I think I'm going to forego the lengthy bio. Try to abbreviate it. First and foremost, I am a Christian. That is number one in my life, serving God, following Jesus. Combat veteran, served in the United States Marine Corps and the Army. Also law enforcement veteran, private contractor, state rifle and pistol champion. Professional big game hunter and guide. If you feel called to support, check out Patreon. There should be a link in the show notes. With that, I am your host, Michael Melito, and I am blessed to serve you today. The S.T.I, now Staccato. They are a thing of beauty. They are a finely tuned machine. They are fast and they are accurate. But are they more than just a range toy? Are they a viable fighting handgun? I'm going to tell you yes. I carried one. You probably heard in the bio. I was the commander of a tactical team to stop active shooters. I was in charge of many things, some of those being writing policies. And I let the men carry what they wanted to, what they shot the best with. We have pretty strict, very strict qualifications, stricter than any law enforcement I've seen. So that weeded out some garbage guns. But I could have carried just about anything. I chose to carry on my hip to save the life of my neighbor, my teammates, and myself in S.T.I 2011, the majority of the time. Why would I do that? Because I think it was the best thing available at the time. They are phenomenal. I think they are the best full-size fighting handgun, with the caveat when operating CONUS, Continental United States, for the people that have not served in the military or not familiar with that term. Continental United States, if I was deploying to Iraq or Afghanistan or Myanmar or the Sudan, maybe not my first choice. But here in America, I can reasonably expect to keep my gun clean and get parts if I need them, and magazines. I think they're the best, probably, for a full-size fighting handgun. So let's learn a little bit about the S.T.I. I'm going to read from the S.T.I Staccato website. For over 25 years, the gun community knew us as S.T.I, the company that evolved from John Browning's classic 1911 design into the 2011 gun platform. With its sophisticated ergonomics, increased capacity, and less recoil, our 2011 pistols were embraced by competition shooters for their speed and accuracy. The S.T.I brand was, and arguably still is, the most decorated brand in the competitive shooting world, having won thousands of matches and championships. Flash forward to today, we are Staccato. End of from Staccato's website. S.T.I has been around a long time. They're not the first double-stack 1911. I know one that was around for quite a while, the Para Ordnance, until it got bought up by Remington and kind of went under. I don't think it was the fault of them, but Para Ordnance, a good double-stack 1911 and good in its own right for competition shooting. However, it had a full metal frame, which made it a lot harder to modify. One of the cool things about the 2011, the S.T.I, was that it was modular before the term modular was cool. Way before the SIG 320 came out. This gun was rocking a modular grip. It's a two-piece lower, for lack of a better term. And you can take the grip module, you can modify it yourself. There are companies that's pretty much what they do, is modify those grip modules. And you can kind of tailor it to you. You can pretty much get a double stack 1911 with 20 something, 26 rounds, 21 rounds, 9mm capacity with a grip not much bigger, if bigger at all, than a regular 1911, because it was designed around that and it uses that modular platform. It's amazing. When they say less recoil, that's not a marketing gimmick. They shoot like a sewing machine. I didn't come up with that. I heard that somewhere and I don't remember where to give them credit. But they really just thump, 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 back and forth. They're just a thing of beauty to shoot. And it's really curious to me why they rebranded to Staccato. I don't know. I looked up and it didn't come from Staccato. It was some other publication, so I'm not going to say this is why. But generally when a company rebrands, it's because they're not doing well. But as far as I know, Staccato has always been a good company. They weren't known for making junk, so I don't know why they rebranded. Although part of their new rebranding, I think, was to get this in more of a gunfighter guise, more of a professional gunfighting community. And I've said this before, I think. Definitely said it before. Whether I've said it before on the podcast, I don't know. But military and law enforcement is about 20 years behind the curve. And I got that from somewhere too, who knows where, years and years ago. But if you look at that, it really is true. Military, law enforcement, they're about 20 years behind the curve. Look at how long competition shooters, really good shooters, have been running LPVOs on ARs. A long time. Very recently did they get embraced by military and law enforcement. I remember starting shooting competition and running an LPVO way back in the day, and I carried it over to my duty gun because I was also at the time active duty. I was a sworn peace officer, and I started carrying that because I was doing competition, and I thought this makes a lot of sense in a law enforcement role. As far as I knew at the time, I knew nobody else doing that. Everybody back then was running an EOTech. That was a cool guy thing because the military was doing it. Anyway, way behind the curve. This is another example of that. S.T.Is have been dominating in great guns for decades. It's only in the last couple of years that really they've been embraced. Again, I started doing this before, but when they became Staccato, they tried to kind of get into that law enforcement, actual gunfighting world instead of just the competition world. And I think they did a good job at that because I do see it. You do see it now in the hands of law enforcement. And I'm a big fan of making sure a platform is proven. And if you've listened for any length of time, you know my general rule. 3 years to make sure something is proven and reliable and the kinks are worked out. But come on, military and law enforcement, they're about 20 years behind the curve. These have been out for well over 20 years. They were well proven, I think, 20 years ago. So why actual gunfighters are just now getting on the bandwagon? Again, it just shows that for whatever reason, they really are 20 years behind the curve. Look at how many military and police units, for lack of a better term, details, still train the Weaver stance. No top shooter has shot in the Weaver stance in 20 years. I mean like world champion practical shooting. Like, that stance is gone. That stance it's on the verge of extinction in most other places, but you still see it being taught in military and law enforcement because they're very behind sometimes in those tactics. I see that changing more and more, but it's still being taught. It'd be like going to a driving school and they start teaching you how to drive a stagecoach with a buggy whip. You're like, this is 2023, man. What are we doing? But you see it. But I am glad to see that now we see some legit gunfighters and thankfully police agencies going with the Staccato. And let me address the Staccato versus S.T.I. I own, by God's grace, 2 S.T.Is. They're my professional gunfighting guns and competition guns, although not in the order you might think. I was a big-time competition shooter, state champion, and won a bunch of things more than I can remember long before I got an S.T.I. But I got an S.T.I. I wanted it because I can win competitions with, production division polymer striker fire handgun. I don't need to spend a bunch of money for that. But when it came to trusting my life, my team's lives, my neighbor's life, the little old lady, the young kid, to me being able to shoot fast and accurate, I knew that the S.T.I was a better gun than what I was running. So when it came to actually gunfighting, that's when I got an S.T.I. Spent the money on it. I got it in the reverse order. I got the S.T.I for gunfighting, and then I started using it in competition because I like to train with what I carry. But if you see people winning and running guns in competition, they're reliable, fast, and accurate. And what part of that do you not want in a gunfight? So I have 2 S.T.Is by God's grace. And I had those before, or right around the time, I had those before Staccatos were coming out. I bought my second one when I saw that John Wick was going to be carrying one, and I don't know that I'd ever seen a John Wick movie, but when I saw like the thing of that was going to be a thing, I figured, well, the prices are going to skyrocket, so I probably should get another one, and sure enough, they did. Time when you could get a S.T.I for right around $1,500 or less. Anyway, so I've got my 2. That being said, there were some other guys. I was not the only one on the team, this kind of elite unit, the stop active shooters, that ran S.T.I Staccato. And my experience with Staccato, although I haven't owned one, I believe their quality is just as good as S.T.I. And if they're just as good, they may even be better, but even if they're just as good, that's phenomenal quality. Just, I don't know how to put it in audio format. If you're used to racking a slide and what that's like, when you go to rack an S.T.I, it's like putting warm butter on a warm piece of toast. It's just smooth. And the whole gun is kind of like that. Smooth, refined, fast, accurate, reliable. Now, the trigger pull, you probably could hear that in the audio. The trigger pull, if an average 1911 is a good trigger pull, and I think that it is. I've often compared a Glock trigger to like dragging a piano down a gravel road or a dirt road. The S.T.Is are good even by 1911 standards. That ought to tell you something. And I'm talking just getting them and running them, not needing any special parts. Like the people, they say they love a Glock and they drop a different trigger, different sights or whatever on it. I'm talking they're a good trigger. And I don't mean light. You could probably get, you almost certainly can get polymer striker fire triggers that are lighter than an S.T.I trigger. By good, I don't mean light. I think that's a common misunderstanding. I mean delicious, clean, crisp, beautiful triggers. And there's 2 parts of shooting accurate. There's the mechanical accuracy of the machine, which I think is often doted on and overanalyzed. But let me say, the S.T.I has that. They are known as being some of the most accurate handguns on the planet. And I think they deserve that reputation. And there's a shooter's ability to shoot that gun well. I could, for instance, get a SIG P210, which is maybe known as the most accurate common production handgun, and I could put a 35-pound trigger in it, a New York number 5, like if I invented that trigger. And the gun would mechanically still be just as accurate, but how accurate would the average person be at shooting that gun? The S.T.I is phenomenal in both respects. It's got good ergonomics because it borrows those from the 1911. Unlike a lot of the double-stack 1911s, it doesn't feel pregnant in your hand. It's not giant around the midsection. It is got great ergonomics. In fact, if you grab one, especially with the custom grips, it feels like you're grabbing a regular 1911, but you can have 22, 26 rounds of capacity. And the ergonomics are fantastic, just especially if you like 1911 ergonomics. They're beautiful. It's not all roses and sunshine, though. There are some downsides to S.T.I 2011s. A good magazine can cost you $75. A good tuned, like top-of-the-line magazine can cost you $100 or more. And I don't usually talk about prices, but that was even like pre-COVID prices. So who knows what they are now. But yeah, you're not like you are with a Glock 19 just going down to the corner gun store probably and getting a magazine unless they specialize in like S.T.I Staccatos. Probably a special order, and probably expensive. You'd be able to buy several Glock magazines, either Glock factory or aftermarket, for the price of an S.T.I. Probably. Also, the cost of the gun, which I think, I'll be totally honest, I think they're worth every penny. But you could have several, maybe a stack of Glocks for the cost of one S.T.I. Is that worth it? I'd say, depending on you, they're absolutely worth the money. Let me caveat that. I was a pretty serious shooter for 20 years or more before I got my first S.T.I. I had won countless competitions before I got my first S.T.I. But you can only really shoot one handgun at a time effectively, despite what the movies would have you believe. So if you've got a couple of Glocks or whatever polymer plastic fantastic, and you're trying to up your shooting ability and have a better gun, you want 4 more Glocks that you're going to end up with in 2 years, or you want to save up for 2 years and get an S.T.I. I think they're absolutely worth every penny. Which brings me to this kind of exponential growth chart of price in handguns. And let me explain. It'd be easy if this were video format, but it's audio, so bear with me. Let's just say, I don't know what post-COVID prices are. I'm trying to do the podcast and trying to be responsible with the Patreon money, not just buying a bunch of random stuff that I don't need. Been a while since I've bought a handgun. But let's say, for argument's sake, that a high point costs $150. And your average good quality polymer striker fired handgun, Smith & Wesson M&P Glock, is going to cost you around $650. Are you getting 3 or 4 times the gun for that money? I think, yeah, you absolutely are. You absolutely are getting 3 or more times the gun for that amount of money. So that value to price ratio is solid. When you get to that, whatever it used to be, $550 to $650, $700 range, somewhere in there, that's your best value on that price chart. Is that S.T.I. that cost, again, 3 or 4 times as much, 3 or 4 times the gun? No, it's not. Is it a substantial amount better, let's say 20%? Yeah, for sure. I think 20% is a good, safe estimate, however you want to quantify that. But you're not spending 20% more, you're spending hundreds of percent more. So if you're talking value, I can't pretend that they're the best value, but they are, I think, worth it if you want that extra performance. Also, they are not, so it's saying everything's not rainbows and sunshine, they're not as forgiving of neglect. You just want a gun that goes bang when you pull the trigger, go get a Glock. If you want a gun that you can shoot several thousand rounds through and then drop it in a porta potty and then leave it in your car for 2 weeks and then shoot it, then if that's what's important to you, then again, get a Glock, or a high point for that matter. If you want a gun that's absolutely reliable, if you maintain it and take care of it, I've said this on previous podcasts and I stand by it because I've run hardcore training classes, like thousands of rounds a week, both platforms. If you stay on top of your gun and maintain it, absolutely an S.T.I. can be absolutely as reliable, in my opinion, as a Glock. And that might sound like heresy, but again, I said if you maintain it. Just a regular 1911, which this is based on, there's a lot of commonality with. They can be absolutely reliable, but you have to do more than you do on a Glock. They're harder to clean, they're harder to disassemble. There's things like tuning extractors, patterning ejection, things like that. If that doesn't bother you and you're willing to, a kind of general rule for my S.T.I., and I'm sure they could go more, I like to clean my gun every 250 rounds, whether it needs it or not. Kind of like taking a bath. You take one every year, whether you need it or not. But if you are willing to clean your gun that often, which is far more than you're going to shoot a handgun in any gunfight I've ever heard of, absolutely can be reliable in my opinion. But they're not as forgiving of neglect and abuse as other platforms. And they are absolutely harder to disassemble and reassemble and maintain. So there is that. Again, they're not for everybody. Now let's talk about some cool variants. Now the S.T.I.s, S.T.I. changed to Staccato, so the S.T.I. models are not going to be available brand new, but you might be able to find them on Gunbroker. One of the coolest ones ever. I used to look at it in magazines back before I ever had one, years and years before I ever had one. I still have never had one. The S.T.I. Executive. They're beautiful. They're like a stainless finish with a white or like a ivory colored grip, and they are striking. Doesn't make them any less effective. A lot of these guns you're going to find S.T.Is, because they were big in the competition world, are going to be in 40 cal, although they did make them in other calibers. Why 40 cal? Well, if you're familiar with USPSA, it'll make sense to you. If not, just take my word for it. Generally, these guns were shot in limited and open division. A lot of them in limited division. For that division, there's called major and minor power factor. Despite what you might think about competition shooting, at least in this, as opposed to like cowboy action, you're not shooting powder puff loads. You're shooting full power loads. If you shoot more powerful, you get what's called major power factor. You have to have a minimum of 40 cal loaded to a certain amount of power to meet major. And since you get more magazine capacity with a 40 than a 45, a lot of these guns are going to be in 40 cal. So a lot of the older ones that were made for competition anyway. So keep that in mind. However, the S.T.I. Executive, I think, was made in a bunch of different calibers. Amazing gun. My personal favorite for gunfighting and my main go-to fighting S.T.I., the S.T.I. Marauder. It's kind of everything you'd want in a gunfighting version of this without a bunch of the extra frills and flash. It's a fantastic gun. I'll probably make a picture of it, an image of it, the thumbnail for the episode. If you listen on Spotify, you can see different thumbnails. If you listen on iTunes, it's pretty much the generic one that I have not, no matter how much I've tried, been able to change over the years. I know that's not the best picture if you're listening on iTunes, but I've tried to change it by writing them, getting a hold of them. You try getting a hold of somebody at Apple. Change your podcast logo. Anyway, the one in that picture is also an S.T.I. actually, just not that one. But there's far better thumbnails if you go over to Spotify. That being said, that S.T.I. Marauder, if you're looking for an older S.T.I. for gunfighting as opposed to competition, fantastic. If you want the best value in an S.T.I., that's the other S.T.I. that I had. That's the one I went out and bought out when I figured out John Wick was going to be carrying an S.T.I. I figured, ooh, they're probably going to jump up. Kind of like the Colt Python did when they started using it in Walking Dead. I turned one of those down years ago before that show came out for hundreds of dollars instead of thousands of dollars. I was like, I'll get one later. Back then they weren't nearly as coveted. And Walking Dead came out, and I kind of learned my lesson there. I saw that John Wick was going to have one. I went and got another one, and sure enough, they skyrocketed in price. Because I think a lot of people that wouldn't have been into that kind of gun, they see, oh, John Wick has it, it must be good. And to be fair, I've seen one of the John Wick movies. I don't remember the one with the dog. Maybe multiple have dogs. I don't know. I don't own a television. But I saw one, had a dog in it. And the gun handling was really good. I think Keanu Reeves, he actually knows his stuff. I don't think you can fake that. So, yeah. But that's kind of going off the point. The topic is that when I saw that the movie was going to come out with him in it, and I assumed the prices were going to go way up, and they did. But if you're looking for best value, the S.T.I. Hawk. The S.T.I. Hawk. Also, the S.T.I. Edge was kind of their go-to competition gun for a long, long time. So there's a lot of those floating around. Most are going to be in 40, but I imagine those on the secondary market would be one of the more affordable ones just because so many were made. They were kind of that go-to limited division gun. Now let's talk about Staccato. They used to make a lot of different models. When they went to Staccato, they kind of streamlined them. And I see now them introducing more and more models. The one that I see that's most analogous to the Marauder that is available, and I'm on their website. There's probably maybe other models, but what they list on their website is the Staccato XL. That looks most analogous to the Marauder that I own. It's not exactly the same, but fairly similar. Kind of their first one that pops up is the Staccato P. It even says duty proven, so it kind of shows you they're kind of marketing towards gunfighters. Although it's a compact. Now it's probably as big as a Glock 17, but in my opinion, a full-size gun is a 5-inch barrel. And this very much looks like a compact, a commander size. So I don't know why, if you're carrying it open, which I assume that's what this is made for, you would want a compact gun. But hey, there you go. There it is, the Staccato P. Maybe a good concealed carry gun if you carry a full-size fighting handgun. And then they have the Staccato XC, which to me looks like a compact gun with a compensator. Again, okay, I mean, that's cool. If you're running a gun that big with a comp, though, I'd want the extra barrel. I want just a full-size barrel with the comp. If you're running it open, you're not really concerned, and I don't want to give up the extra velocity and trajectory and reliability and hollow point expansion that I get with the longer barrel. But hey, that's the model they have, the Staccato XC. It looks like a compact gun with a compensator that would give you around the same size overall as a regular 1911. And they do have a couple models they market for concealed carry, the CS and the C2. I'm not sure that I was familiar with those before I started this episode. They look tiny as far as like a 1911 goes. I would have assumed in 2023 that pretty much all their guns came cut for an optic, but actually they don't. I'd say the majority. Well, let's just say there's a lot. Maybe it's even. The ones that do and don't come ready cut for an optic. But just be aware of that. They're not all optics ready on the models that I see. Anyway, the S.T.I 2011 platform, and there are some other companies I think that make them. I'm going to stick in this episode to the S.T.I/Staccato. They are smooth, amazingly well-built, well-constructed guns. I can vouch for the ones that I have and the ones I have experience with. They're just phenomenal guns. Anyway, if you didn't know much about the 2011 or thinking about getting one or just wanted to better understand the platform, hopefully this podcast is useful. If you appreciate this podcast, this episode, or any other, I hope that you will consider supporting. There should be a Patreon link in the show notes. With that, the tactical tip of the day and then the tactical verse of the day. A couple of rapid-fire tactical tips for the S.T.I as I've run them quite a bit, competition and as a professional gunfighter. I assume one of the reasons you got an S.T.I is because you want to shoot fast. Taking a dab of bright, obnoxious colored nail polish, chartreuse, bright orange, whatever the color is. Dabbing in that inside the mag well, the magazine well, so that when you go to insert that magazine, your eyes are drawn to it. And throw that magazine into that mag funnel fast. Also, I mentioned these things, they require a little bit more maintenance. Although you're supposed to change the recoil spring on your Glock every, I think, 3,000 to 5,000 rounds. I think a lot of people don't do that, and they get away with it. If you're spending this much money on a gun, get some extra springs. The recoil springs on these, I think, are supposed to be changed every 1,000 rounds. And the good news is they're like $6 to $8, something like that. Have a bunch of them just in the bag that you carry the gun in. When you get through a case of ammo, you get a new spring. Again, they're not expensive. Also, if you're going to start running a 1911 style gun, I would encourage you to have an extra extractor, pre-tuned, because you can't just throw them in. They're not like a Glock extractor when you break an extractor. You got to tune them. So get it, tune it, and then have it as a backup. Or if you're familiar with 1911s, you might know when your extractor's got a few hundred rounds left in it, it's starting to get a little out of spec. Keep that one and put the brand new one in and tune it. Keep the old one for a backup in case something happens to the extractor. But a couple of tips there on the S.T.I. Also, one more. Hyperlube. That sounds fancy. It's an automotive additive for oil. It's very inexpensive compared to like gun oils. It's real thick, it's real viscous. I don't use it on the trigger components, but I do use it very much so on the slide and the barrel. Kind of that slide to frame friction points. It's smooth, it's real thick, real viscous. Unless you're in like a really, really cold environment, just a great all-around lube for that. Not for the trigger components, not for the very small parts. But fantastic, especially on a gun as smooth as the S.T.I. Again, that's Hyperlube. You find it in like the engine oil additive section of Walmart or wherever, AutoZone. It's going to lead us to the tactical verse of the day. You'll find this in the book of Ephesians. Finally, my brethren, be strong in the Lord and in the power of his might. Put on the whole armor of God, that you may be able to stand against the wiles of the devil. For we do not wrestle against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of darkness of this age, against spiritual hosts of wickedness in heavenly places. Therefore take up the whole armor of God, that you may be able to withstand the evil day, and having done all, to stand. As somebody who is acquainted with war, like actual physical war, oftentimes the battle in our mind, in our soul, and our spirit can be far more dangerous, harder to navigate, a harder fight than physical. A lot of men, especially if you're a warrior, a physical fighter, you just have it inside you to fight. Often have to fight the urge to show it physically. Physical fight can kind of come natural to our natural manliness. But the spiritual fight, the battle in our mind, oftentimes is a harder battle. So, have that armor of God. The sword of the Spirit, which the Word says is the Word of God. Thanks for listening, and have a blessed day.